So there has been a lot of chaos and confusion in the scientific community over the last couple of weeks after the inauguration. Almost immediately after, there, of course, were freezes to NIH advisory council meetings and study section meetings, which, as of yesterday, late yesterday, those have been reinstated. So we are somewhat back to regular programming, but I did want to talk today about the sort of lingering uncertainty, certainly for some of our colleagues in the scientific community who are doing health equity related research, and just I think for a lot of folks, the sort of added realization of the precarious situation that we're in. So that is what we're going to talk about today: how to navigate this moment. So if you are new around here, my name is Sarah Dobson. I'm a research grant consultant, and my team and I help early career researchers get funded at NIH. So I'm sure it's a small consolation, but you are not alone in feeling anxious or uncertain. This is something that has, of course, preoccupied the scientific community over the last couple of weeks, and of course, not just the biomedical research community either. Right? This has been across the board challenges and questions about the future of research funding. And so, obviously, that is bringing up a lot of questions. It's bringing up a lot of anxiety. And that is really what I wanted to talk about today. So, as I said, for the time being, it seems that some of the elements of the freeze have been lifted. So those advisory council meetings will proceed. The study sections will be rescheduled, but there is a lingering uncertainty. And so, what can we do about it? The very first thing that I want to mention and speak to is some of what I observed on social media about how sort of the initial reaction from researchers on hearing the news that the grants that they had worked so hard to prepare and submit were not going to get reviewed. And it's understandable, and of course very tempting in that moment to think that all is lost and all of that work that you put in is for nothing. But that is not true, not at all. And what I want to help you think about a little bit, first of all, is that about paperwork. It's not just about checking boxes, right? It, in my view, is part of the process of doing research. There's a lot of design and conceptualization and planning that goes into writing a grant. And then, of course, the communication piece, learning how to communicate the value of your work in advance of doing it, will help you once you ultimately complete the work and you are disseminating your findings, right? And so thinking about grant writing only in terms of the sort of administrative hoops that you have to jump through and the paperwork that you have to complete is really a limited view of what grant writing is and what ought to be in my view, right? And of course, I'm biased because this is what I do for a living, but I think there's a real opportunity here, first of all, to remember that this is part of a broader process that you're engaging in, and that work that you may have done last year to submit a grant that is supposed to be reviewed around now, that for a while looked like it might not be. That doesn't mean that all of that work is lost. That intellectual work that you did is still yours and will always be yours, right? It's the value of your work is not dependent on any funding agency or even your institution, right? Your job is to do the research, to find the appropriate funding home for that research, and to stay true to your mission as a scientist and the impact that you want to have. And that doesn't begin when you're actually getting your hands dirty and doing the research. It begins when you start thinking creatively about the scientific problems that you want to solve, the gaps in knowledge that you want to fill, and how you're going to do that in a way that is interesting to you and is going to advance the field, right? So thinking first of all about grant applications a little bit more broadly, I think can hopefully sort of tune down some of the anxiety of this moment, when there are setbacks, when there are challenges, right? So that's the first thing that I wanted to bring up to you, and to speak to those of you who were sort of caught up in the initial freeze. But remember too that again, your job is to advance the field and to make that contribution. And how you do that, how you fund the research, that piece can change. And I think what this moment is pointing individual researchers towards, and hopefully also their institutions who have been heavily reliant on NIH funding, is that we need to broaden our perspective on our funding portfolios and diversifying those funding portfolios. So the best advice that I can offer you as we continue to sort of weather this storm and get a better picture of what is to come is to first and foremost keep going. Just stay focused on what you can control, stay focused on the research itself and the contribution that you want to make. And in whatever ways you can, get really clear on what it is that you're here to do, and what the contribution is that you want to make to the field. And if you can focus on that, that will open up new opportunities, new avenues, new creative ways of fulfilling that mission, instead of being so sort of laser focused on NIH funding. And I do understand and acknowledge that that a lot of this is dictated by institutional expectations, right? And that's why many scientists feel compelled, required to kind of put all of their eggs in one funding basket, is because that is the expectation of their institution for promotion, for tenure, and so on, right? And again, it is my great hope that that this moment will spur institutions to realize that they have always been asking a lot of their faculty in this way, but that this pool of funding may not be as reliable as they have counted on in the past, right? So again, keep going. Keep writing those grants that you're planning to submit later this year. And again, remember that none of this work is wasted. That planning, that conceptualizing, that communicating the value of the work, that is all valuable no matter what, and no matter where you intend to apply. And the last thing I'll say about that is it's really important to document any delays or any changes during this moment so that you have a record of it, and that may come in handy down the line when you are applying in the future, right? So document everything to the extent that you can, just again, as things remain up in the air, right? And of course, continuing on with this idea of keeping going and focusing on the research and the impact itself rather than the source of funds, is prepare to pivot to non-federal funding sources. And of course, this is going to be easier for some than for others, but it's really important to investigate what might be available within your institution first and foremost. So that would be my first stop. And I'm looking at this in two ways. Number one is internal funds, grant funds that are available within your institution to support your work or to bridge your work as we sort of navigate and cope with this uncertainty. But the other thing is to take advantage of the resources available to you within your research support office, if you are fortunate to have one. Those resources that are available can usually help you sort of figure out what your next steps might be, what options are available to you beyond the sort of traditional and expected federal funding sources, right? So use the resources that are available to you within your institution first and foremost. And then, of course, beyond that, do your own homework about what other opportunities might be available to you beyond those federal sources. And I think most importantly here is to prepare to communicate about your research to new audiences, right? Particularly audiences outside of your subject matter area, which means that you're going to need to think about how to communicate your research, very likely to non-experts, right? So when you are thinking about opening up to new audiences, how can you communicate what you do? How can you communicate the value of what you do to audiences who may be less familiar with the specifics or the technical details of your work? And usually the best place to start thinking about this is understanding what your audience's priorities are. So what do they care about? And figure out how you can best speak to what that audience's priorities are and what they care about, and align the work that you do with their priorities and what matters to them, so that you're creating that win-win. That is really, grantsmanship 101, whether you are applying to an NIH institute or center. And that's how we talk about it when we teach. Aligning with your audience. We talk about figuring out what the mission and priorities of the NIH institute or center are, and making sure that you are speaking to that directly. And it's the exact same thing no matter where else you're applying, right? You're thinking about what the mission and priorities of your target funder is, and how can you speak to that? How can you present the impact of your research as a benefit that's in alignment with the mission and priorities of whoever it is that you're seeking funding from? Okay. And finally, I think it's really important to reemphasize and underline that it is so important right now to engage with your networks for both support and for advocacy. Right? So your networks, whether that's your faculty association, whether that's any professional associations that you are affiliated with, and of course, just your colleagues and your peers at your institution and beyond your own institution, right? Everybody is feeling this right now. And I think the small consolation in that is that there are plenty of people to reach out to who understand what it's like, which can help anybody feel less alone in this moment. But it's also a really important opportunity to advocate, right? To organize and to advocate. And the changes that we've seen as of last night are a result of that advocacy and that pushback. And so it's really important to cultivate and maintain those networks, not just for moments like this in sort of high stress scenarios, but to create that sense of community and support all the time. That of course will be there in these moments that are really challenging, but knowing that always exists, and I know it can be tricky in academic life. It can be really isolating. It can be really lonely, and that's another really important reason to cultivate those networks. But again, in moments like this, there are not only those opportunities for support, but also for organizing and advocacy. So that is it for today. It has been a wild ride over these last couple of weeks, and I suspect that will continue in a variety of ways over the next little while. And I'm going to keep talking about this over the course of this month, even though it seems in some ways like things are returning to the status quo. But of course, for a lot of scientists, that is most certainly not true. And so we will continue to talk about this and to navigate this together. But I'm wishing you all the very best in this anxious moment,